The Cathedral of Turin in Italy houses what could be the most sacred object in the Christian world, the so-called Turin Shroud. And in spring 2010 there was a rare opportunity to see it as it was put on public display. The cathedral emphasised that this was a spiritual and religious event, not a commercial or touristic one. I was one of those who made the pilgrimage to Turin to see what has traditionally been called the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I only went for 3 days, but thanks to the ash cloud that grounded flights across Europe, I ended up staying for a week. During that time I was privileged to see the shroud up close half a dozen times. In this video I'm going to talk about what the shroud is, including the question of authenticity. And in another video I'll take a close look at what the shroud tells us, treated as a piece of forensic evidence. So, what is the Turin Shroud? Well, it's a length of cloth containing the faint imprint of a male figure, both front and back. It's a bit the worse for wear thanks to a fire in 1532 when molten metal dripped onto it. This left burn marks down each side. They're symmetrical because the shroud was folded up at the time. What makes the shroud important is that it is claimed to be the one in which Christ was wrapped after being let down from the cross and placed in the tomb. The Catholic Church does not insist that the shroud is genuine. Belief in the shroud is not an article of faith, and so Christians don't need to take a definite view. Nevertheless, the shroud image does accurately reflect Christ's wounds as described in the Gospels, and in that respect, as the Archbishop of Turin has said, it's a worthy focus for prayer and contemplation. Exhibitions of the shroud occur at irregular intervals. The most recent were in 1931, 1933, 1978, 1998, 2000 and 2010. There's usually a special reason for each exhibition. For example, 1998 celebrated 500 years of the cathedral, and 2000 was, of course, the 2000th anniversary of Christ's birth. This latest exhibition seems to have been to show the restoration of the shroud that's taken place since 2000. After the fire of 1532, the shroud was patched up and attached to a backing cloth. These patches have now been removed and the backing cloth has been replaced. This gave the opportunity to examine the back of the shroud for the first time since the 16th century. At the same time, a series of very high-definition photos were taken. It's my feeling that these will end up on the internet, and the shroud itself may not be exhibited again for quite a long time. Over 1 million pilgrims visited the exhibition. It was a big event for the city and carefully organised. There was a team of cathedral volunteers recognisable by their lilac tabards, and they were supported by detachments from the emergency services, the police, and even the army. During the exhibition it was possible to enter the cathedral and see the shroud at any time. For a closer look it was necessary to book a ticket, but these were free and readily available. The queue took 1 or 2 hours. This was a time for preparation and reflection. Towards the end, pilgrims were shown a film explaining how to read the shroud. When the queue entered the cathedral, the party atmosphere was left behind. The line split into 3, going to higher, middle and lower platforms in front of the shroud. Then each group of pilgrims had a couple of minutes to study the shroud while a prayer was read out.
Signore Gesù, nella Santa Sindone contempliamo tutti I segni della croce sofferenza.
But were all these people deluded? Could the burial cloth of Christ really have survived like this? Ever since the Middle Ages there have been people saying the shroud is a forgery, and modern science seemed to prove them right. The shroud first came to light in France in the mid-1300s, with no clear records of its existence before that. Then, in 1988, the shroud was carbon dated to between 1260 and 1390. In other words, it was created in the Middle Ages, around the time the world first got to hear of it. In this light, one of the scientists responsible for the carbon dating said that those who believe the shroud is genuine might as well believe the earth is flat. Such dismissiveness is far from justified. However, we live in an anti-scientific age when science has developed into a massive dogma and its methods and conclusions are held to be infallible. This has little to do with true science, which is not about conviction and absolute truth, but is about doubt and open-mindedness. Because even if the shroud is a forgery, it remains a remarkable object. The suggestion it was made in medieval times raises as many questions as it answers. The forgery, if that is what it is, was way ahead of its time. For a start, medieval paintings of the crucifixion show the nails passing through the palms of Christ's hands. But a man's weight could not be supported that way, and in fact, the Romans drove the nails through the wrists. On the shroud image, the nail wounds are shown in the correct position, through the wrists, not the palms. This is one of many details where the shroud is convincing from a historical and physiological perspective. Other examples include the pattern of blood flow on the arms and the marks on the back, which match those of an authentic Roman flail. Another remarkable feature of the shroud is that it is like a photographic negative. It looks better when the patterns of light and dark are reversed. Even today it would be difficult for an artist to get this right, and in the Middle Ages they would have had no examples to work from. Even more remarkable is that the shroud image contains three-dimensional information. If the darker areas are interpreted as those where the shroud was closer to the body, then it's possible to build up a 3D image of the shroud man. No painting has this property. There is also the fact that no one is really sure how the shroud image was formed. The bloodstains are understandable enough and have been shown to contain real blood. But the main image is just on the surface of the cloth. It's not paint, but involves some chemical transformation of the fibres. There have been various attempts to reproduce this, but none has the same quality as the real shroud. The upshot is that if the shroud is a forgery, it is an exceptionally clever one. There are fake shrouds from the Middle Ages, but in their case the fakery is obvious. The Shroud of Turin is in a class of its own, and continues to perplex us to this day. It's also become clear that the carbon dating may not give the shroud's true age. There's a possibility that the sample removed for testing contained repairs made after the fire of 1532. In that case, the scientists dated the wrong thing. There are other indications that the shroud may well come from the time of Christ. The weave of the cloth is more Roman than medieval, and it's the right width for the typically narrow looms of those times. Changes in the chemical composition of the fibres also suggest an age going back to the Roman era, and the pollen of plants native to ancient Palestine has been found on the cloth. Hard to explain if it was woven in medieval France. What seems clear is that the shroud, to be so accurate and to have those other mysterious qualities, must have been made somehow using a real human body. And that body was of someone who had precisely the wounds the Bible attributes to Christ. If it is a medieval forgery, then the forgers used the Bible as their model. But if the shroud goes back to the time of Christ, which cannot yet be ruled out, and if it carries the imprint of someone who suffered the same way Christ did, which it does, then it really is not much of a stretch to suggest that it actually was Christ. In the other video, I will show just how exactly the shroud image matches the sufferings of Christ, and just how terrible those sufferings were.